Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into a really grim but honestly fascinating historical account. We're looking at a catastrophic military defeat that didn't just end a single life, it literally reshaped an ancient nation's borders overnight. The event is the Battle of Mount Gilboa, and what we're unpacking here is a stark, incredibly dramatic record of the end of King Saul's reign. Now, think about this for a second. What's really wild about this text is just how fast everything falls apart for the Israelites. We usually think of massive historical shifts taking, decades or even centuries, right? But here, in one bloody, chaotic battle, they lose absolutely everything. The source material paints this picture of a sudden, violent vacuum of power that leaves a whole nation entirely exposed. Section 1. The Battle of Mount Gilboa. So let's trace how this tension builds. We're tracking a sequence of totally devastating events, and they unfold over just a matter of days. Day 1 is just total war and defeat. Then, the very next morning brings the horrific aftermath, which is immediately followed by this daring, covert night mission. And the whole thing culminates in a strict 7-day period of mourning. It's an absolute whirlwind of tragedy. Zooming in on that first day, the text describes a scene of just total, unmitigated chaos. The men of Israel are fleeing from the Philistines, literally falling down slain right there on Mount Gilboa. And the enemy forces don't just win the field, they follow hard upon Saul and his family. This relentless pursuit leads to the slaughter of King Saul's own sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. It happens right before his eyes. The entire dynasty is being systematically dismantled in the heat of combat. Section 2. The Fall of the King. Now, the crucial point here is that Saul isn't just losing the tactical fight. He is critically, personally compromised. The text tells us the battle went sore against Saul, and the enemy archers find their mark. He's severely wounded by them, so he's pinned down, bleeding out, watching his sons die. Saul knows for a fact that his capture is absolutely imminent. And this brings us to a quote that brilliantly illustrates the sheer horror of his situation. Saul turns to his armor-bearer and begs for death. He says, "Draw thy sword and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me." Why? Because his biggest fear isn't dying. It's what happens if they take him alive. He'd rather beg his own man to end his life than face the humiliation and agonizing torture he knows his enemies will inflict if they find him breathing. Notice the domino effect of despair that happens next. First, the armor-bearer refuses. The text says he is sore afraid, which makes sense. He's probably terrified to strike his anointed king. So, step 2. Left with zero options, Saul takes his own sword and falls on it. He commits suicide right there on the battlefield. Then, step 3. The armor-bearer sees the king is dead, and he follows suit, falling upon his own sword. And that brings us to the bleak conclusion in step 4. Saul, his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, all his men, they all die together on that same day. A nation's entire leadership wiped out in just a few hours. Section 3. Retreat and Occupation. We really have to zoom out now to grasp the geopolitical fallout of this disaster. Because in the ancient world, the sudden death of a leader, that meant immediate territorial shifts. This triggers a lightning-fast transfer of power. Across the valley in the Jordan, the Israelites see their army has fled, their royal family is wiped out, and panic just sweeps the local population. They completely abandon their cities and run for their lives. Meanwhile, the Philistines, they literally just walk right in. They come into the abandoned cities and dwell in them. No siege, no further fighting. The psychological blow of Saul's death simply hands the territory over. Section 4. The Philistine Trophies. Fast forward to the battlefield the very next morning. On the morrow, as the text puts it, it's become a place of looting. The Philistines come out to strip the slain of their valuables and weapons, and it's during this morbid task that they hit the ultimate jackpot. They discover the fallen bodies of Saul and his 3 sons on Mount Gilboa. This discovery gave the Philistines the ultimate symbols of their triumph. Look at how they weaponized this victory. It wasn't enough that Saul was dead. He had to be made an absolute example of. First, they cut off his head. Then they strip his royal armor. They send messengers throughout the entire land of the Philistines to broadcast this news, specifically taking it into the houses of their idols and to their people, turning a military win into this massive religious and ideological triumph. They put Saul's armor on display in the house of Ashtaroth to claim their deity as superior. And finally, the ultimate act of disrespect. They fastened his decapitated body to the public wall of Bethshan. Section 5. The Rescue by Jabesh Gilead. But, the story actually doesn't end with that horrific desecration. It concludes with an absolutely incredible, defiant display of loyalty. When word finally reaches the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead about what the Philistines did to Saul, how they humiliated his remains, they don't cower in fear like the ones who abandoned the cities. Instead, their valiant men mobilize. They refuse to let their king stay a gruesome trophy on an enemy wall. So look at the logistics of this covert nighttime operation. This is basically an ancient special ops mission. First, these valiant men travel completely through the dark of night, deep into enemy-occupied territory. Step 2, they physically pull the bodies of Saul and his sons right off the wall of Beth-shan, literally right under the noses of the Philistine garrison. Step 3, they bring the remains back to Jabesh. Then step 4, they burn the bodies there, making sure they can never be desecrated again. Step 5, they respectfully bury the remaining bones under a tree at Jabesh. And finally, they begin a strict fast for 7 days, giving their fallen leadership the immense mourning it deserved. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final question to chew on. What does true loyalty look like in the face of total defeat? The men of Jabesh-Gilead didn't act when victory was guaranteed. No, they acted in the dark shadow of absolute national ruin. They risked everything just to restore dignity to a fallen king. It's a really profound coda to a tragic historical event, showing that even when borders collapse and kings fall, human courage can still have the final word. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this incredible account today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.